This book has been published for the adult market, but we really wanted to host this event for several reasons. One, I've known Bex for a few years because her mum, Barbara, is a librarian that many of you will know, and she's a very good friend of mine. Bex herself is a remarkable young woman. The book is brilliant. It's got some very positive messages about female empowerment, and we want to support her and the book on its journey out into the reading world. And although it is published as an adult book, it would work really well for upper Key Stage 3 students and Key Stage 4 students. So that's why we're doing this lovely event with Bex tonight. And the shape of the event, Bex and I will be chatting about the book and about her work in developing Love Her Wild. She'll do a couple of readings to give you a taste of the book. And then if you've got questions or comments during the event, pop them in the chat box and we will deal with them at the end. You can order a signed book-plated copy of Three Stripes South from H&H Spalding Books. And we've put the link in the chat box to the order line, and they're £9.99 including postage and packing for a single copy, or £8 if you want to order 6 or more copies. And don't forget, Christmas is coming up, so you might like to treat people for their Christmas presents. So can you all now switch your mics and cameras off? And I would like to now welcome and introduce Bex Band to you. Bex is the ordinary adventurer, although actually there's nothing ordinary about this young woman. She's founder of the women's adventure company, Love Her Wild, which is the largest women's adventure company in the UK, and which now has over 25,000 members, taking women on adventures all over the world and running initiatives to help make the outdoors more accessible. She's the author, as I say, of Three Stripes South, the story of her adventure, of the adventure on her 1,000-kilometre adventure hiking along the Israeli National Trail with her husband, Gil. She's a keen conservationist and environmentalist. She's been acknowledged as the leading name in women's adventuring, and her work has been recognised in a number of ways. She was shortlisted for the Great Outdoors Personality of the Year Award. She was runner-up for the Activity People Blogger Award. She was awarded, and I love this, she was awarded Legacy Maker status in the San Miguel Alternative Rich List, which is not about money, but it's a list of people who have wealth in other ways. She won the Next Generation Award, and she was shortlisted for a National Diversity Award. She's also had a number of other adventures, like kick scooting the length of the USA and kayaking the width of the UK via waterways, picking up thousands of pieces of plastic pollution. So I hope she'll talk to us a bit about that later in the evening. Oh, yeah. And in addition to all of this, she's recently found time to give birth to her first baby. So, like I said, an amazing young woman. I was looking, I loved Three Stripes South, and I was looking at what other people have said about it. I just wanted to share a couple of reviews with you. The Last Word book review said, Bex writes with humour and passion for what she does, and how this trek has changed her life. After returning home, she set up Love Her Wild, and this has inspired so many people with her social media posts. And just reading Three Stripes South is inspiring. You will want to buy yourself a pair of walking boots and head off. You can almost feel the heat of the sun from the pages. It's an engaging read, and I really enjoyed the adventure. And then Sienna's World review said, I've read many adventure memoirs over the years, some of which I've loved, others which were kind of forgettable. The ones that have stayed with me aren't necessarily the most daring tales or epic adventures, but the ones where the author's inner journey was as powerful as what was going on in their outer world. This is why Bex Band's book, Three Stripes South, was utterly captivating for me. Throughout, I was drawn in by her self-analysis, her strengths, her flaws, and the challenges she had faced. Three Stripes South is a book of heart. It shares true feelings and emotions and makes Bex a very likeable, relatable, and accessible storyteller. Three Stripes South is a book for anyone who has ever doubted themselves but wants to push through their barriers and make their dreams happen. It is for any woman who hasn't seen herself represented in her field, who wants to make a change in society. It is for anyone who's been told they can't achieve something and feeling called to smash that misconception down. It was a book I struggled to put down, and I'm looking forward to rereading it. It is inspiring, important, but above all, just a really lovely read. So, welcome, Bex. And perhaps we can start by me asking you to tell us a little of the background that led you into this adventuring life.
Sure. Thank you for having me again. And what an amazing introduction. That was quite impressive. Thank you. So really, my mum's here. She'll testify to this. I come from quite an outdoorsy family. It's not like we went on big hikes or did camping growing up. And so really, this adventure was my gateway to the world of adventure and the outdoors. I think I'd always had that spark in me and that interest in adventure and getting outdoors, but I hadn't had a huge amount of opportunities to kind of pursue that growing up. And at the time, I found myself in my 20s, in my mid-20s, and I was leading quite an unhealthy lifestyle in London. And I found myself, since graduating from university, switching from one job I didn't like to the next. And I was constantly trying to find a career that I felt satisfied with, and was really failing to kind of find a job that I felt content with, and was generally just quite miserable. My mental health was really in tatters. And I just changed careers again for the umpteenth time, and I'd moved from working in the charity sector, and I signed up to do my teacher training. And a few weeks into the course, I realised it was not what I was expecting at all, and wasn't this exciting, passionate career that I was hoping for. And I knew that really I needed a big drastic change, and it was the Israel National Trail that I had seen. It was actually in a National Geographic article about the best long distance hikes in the world. I didn't even really know there was a thing as long distance hikes. My husband is originally from Israel, so the Israel National Trail stood out immediately, and I just thought I have to do this. And it was a really brave and bold move at the time. I hadn't done anything like it before. I didn't know anyone who'd done anything like this before, but it turned out to be the best decision I'd ever make.
Muted myself. So the librarian in me says, having made that decision, so when you first decided to hike the trail, what kind of research did you then do, and how did you go about it?
So there isn't actually a huge amount of information online for foreigners hiking the Israel National Trail. So a lot of Israelis hike it, but not many foreigners do. So the first place I looked was obviously online for blogs or information websites that people had written, and found very little. I looked for books. No one had written a book about hiking the trail. But I did find what is called the Red Book, which is basically a guidebook for the trail. And it has all the maps you need, and on the maps it marks where you can camp, where you can find water, where you can find food stops and things like that, so that while you're doing the hike you can plan a few days ahead, and plan your food and water. And so that was it really. So other than those little tidbits of information, it was mostly left to my imagination.
That's quite a scary leap of faith in some respects, isn't it? So about the book, can you sort of explain to our audience why the book is called Three Stripes South?
So the Israel National Trail is waymarked. So it's a 1,080-kilometer trail, and it's waymarked by 3 stripes. So one is orange to represent the desert in the south, the Negev Desert. And then blue is in the middle, which represents the middle section where you walk along the Mediterranean Sea on the way down to Tel Aviv. And then the white, this always makes me laugh, represents the north of Israel, where sometimes right at the tip of the mountains they get snow for a couple of days a year, but they're quite proud of that snow. It normally makes front page news, and so the white represents the north of Israel. And so if you're walking northbound, the white, the way you're the direction you're walking in will always be at the top, and then if you're walking south, as we were, the orange representing the desert will always be in the top, and that way you know you're not walking the wrong way.
Yeah, you don't want to do that. So having done it, what would you say were your 3 greatest challenges and your 3 greatest highlights?
Oh, tough one. So the greatest challenges, number one, would have been the heat. It was so hot. The second I step foot in Israel, you just get this wall of heat. And I wasn't accustomed to that. So kind of had to adapt and hike really early on in the day, and try and not hike in the hottest part of the day between 12 and 3. And it really just saps your energy. The heat, it can be quite exhausting, make you feel very sick as well. And you've got to watch out for heat stroke. The second biggest challenge would have been the weight of the bag. So like we all walk all the time, to get to and from places, and walking is relatively easy for most of us, but as soon as you add a heavy backpack, it really is in a different league. So the backpacks had everything we needed to be self-contained, so camping equipment, food supplies, if one spare change of clothes. We had clothes that we hiked in, and then clothes that you sleep and relax in. And you want to try and keep them as light as possible, but you'd obviously need quite a lot of water and food to get you through the days. And I just found it, gosh, just the energy of putting one foot in front of the other was difficult. And the third, perhaps biggest challenge was actually just myself and my head, because if you're ever doing anything like a long distance hike or an adventure, you really are just stuck with yourself all the time, and so you have all those voices of self-doubt telling you you're not gonna make it, you're not fit enough. And that was something that I had to overcome almost every day, to stop myself from having these negative thoughts about quitting and that I wouldn't make it happen. As for 3 highlights, gosh, it's so difficult to pick highlights. 3 highlights. I love the moment when we first saw the sea in the middle stretch as we were heading towards Tel Aviv, and we'd been hiking for 2 weeks, and the hardest part of the trail was those first couple of weeks, and saw that blue water, and it was just amazing. And it felt like, I called it a hiker's holiday because it was flat. We were walking on the sand. We could go for a swim in the evening. Most days, like, we didn't wash on the trail. You could go like even a week without having a shower. So that felt like a real luxury. Second highlight, definitely in terms of experiences that I remember when we were in the desert. I spent 2 nights in Yotz Madar, which is a kibbutz, and it's one of the last remaining kibbutz in Israel, where it is a proper commune, and they allow hikers to stay there for a couple of days in exchange for work, as everyone else in the commune has the same agreement. And they really do put you to work. It was a long day in the olive factory, and I was milking goats and all sorts of stuff. It was just fascinating to see, and just really weird as well. It was just a really weird experience. And of course, finishing the hike. It was an amazing moment, running into the sea fully clothed, knowing that I'd done it, and that was it. The next day I didn't have to put that damn bag on, and I didn't have to hike.
And you managed to get rid of the guy that was trying to gate crash your final moments, which
Yeah.
I was very pleased about.
Yeah, the irony, the one British guy I meet, and it was just before the end. I was trying to have this big sentimental moment, and I couldn't shake this annoying British man.
Can I ask you then, perhaps at that point, to do a little reading to give people a taste?
Sure. So this is just in the first chapter, and I had discovered this trail, and I realized that the only way I'd be able to hike it is if I could convince Gil, my husband, to come along with me, and we would have to dismantle our lives. So Gil had just come in from work. I'd sat him down, and I told him the news that I had a great idea. And this was the end of our conversation. Gil turned back to me. The Israel National Trail, he said, as if playing with the words out loud before a slight grin appeared in the corner of his mouth. I'm in. Let's do it. The next day, we booked our flights. It felt like the signature at the end of a contract, the seal of an envelope. We had cemented our decision. Could it really be that easy? The hike felt like such a momentous thing, but the hardest part of getting to the start had been the simple act of just saying yes. What followed was methodical taking apart of our lives, chipping away at a to-do list, one task after another. With the click of an email, we left the careers we had spent years working towards. We decluttered and reduced our possessions and handed in the notice on our flat. We moved in with family for our final weeks and had our goodbye parties with friends. All my spare time was now reserved for searching the internet, desperately looking for answers for all the things I didn't know. How hard is it to hike 1,000 kilometers? How do you go to the toilet outdoors? What animals can kill you in the desert? Finally, all that was left was our boarding passes and 2 bulky backpacks that sat in the corner of our temporary bedroom. Looking at all the shiny and perfectly organized gear, I couldn't decide if it made me feel more prepared and ready for the trail, or more like I was well and truly out of my depth. Either way, and despite all the nerves and doubting, the presence of the packs made me certain of one thing. It felt good to be doing something different, taking a proactive step, shaking up our lives. Maybe this would turn out to be a good decision, or maybe it wouldn't. One thing was certain though, this was going to be an adventure.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about your writing. I think for me, I think the book has one of the best opening lines and paragraphs in a book that I've read in a long time. That, you know, I open the book, is there anything more reliable in life than a toilet cubicle? And it just, that whole paragraph just made me laugh. And as a reader, it drew me in from the start, because it just creates that very visual description. So how did you decide how to open the book and create that visuality?
Do you know what? It's funny because I remember reading how to, tips on like how to write an adventure memoir, and they said open with the most exciting, dramatic part of the adventure. Like that's how you grip your audience. And when I actually sat down to write the introduction, it was actually I left it quite a long time because it feels like such a big pressure. How are you going to open your book? And I was actually just in the flow of writing, and I thought just give it a go. And I just really distinctly had this memory of sitting in the toilet cubicle and just kind of wishing I could stay in there forever, because I was at the Israel airport, and I knew leaving was like the start of the adventure. And so I just wrote it, and I thought, gosh, I'm not going to open with a toilet cubicle. But I did, and I stuck to it, and so many people mention it.
It is. It's just such a brilliant opening, because the contrast between that kind of private moment and what comes next along the trail, where you don't really have the chance for much private moments because you're exhausted and on the move all the time. I just really enjoyed that, and that your whole descriptive writing is excellent, and there's just so many flashes of humor within the kind of the dramatic side of what you're actually doing. So your description of how you didn't fit the mold of a normal hiker because you never really liked exercise, your comment, like, I need defrosting time after an early start. I knew exactly what you meant by that. And particularly your description of your conversation with your mum after you'd met Gil while you were traveling in Guatemala, and you told her you'd met the man you were going to marry, and her response was to ask, was he Guatemalan? And you said no, he's Israeli. She just took it all in her stride, and it really made me laugh, because knowing your mum, I could see and hear that response to you. And that's what I loved about the book. You know, you're doing this amazing adventure, that there is so much humor that is included in the book. And I think one thing that surprised me, because I enjoyed it so much, I think what I found extraordinary was your constant worry that your writing wasn't going to be good enough. As a reader, I really loved the way that you write, because it actually feels like when you, as a reader, it feels like you're having a conversation with you, and you're visualizing you on that journey. You know, you feel what you're experiencing, your sights and sound. And I know that you are dyslexic, which is quite challenging. Your school experiences made it harder for you growing up. So how hard was it for you to actually write the book, and structure it, think about it, and then actually write it?
Definitely, I've always had this thing with writing that, like, I'm just not a good writer and I'm not capable of writing well, and that always stems from my school years, when, because I was dyslexic and I couldn't get that down, what I was trying to say down on paper, especially coherently, because my writing was all a mess. The teachers would make assumptions about my work or get frustrated, and especially my spelling. That was always something I look back through my reports recently, and it's all just comments and comments about how bad my spelling is. So this was something I kind of carried with me, so it made it really nerve-wracking to put it out there. I mean, the book was almost so daunting and big, I just kind of approached it chapter by chapter, and just saw each chapter as like a standalone story, and kind of broke it down like that. And I was quite disciplined that I'd wake up in the morning and I'd say no phones, no emails, until I've written 1,000 words. And I found that often once I sat down and started writing, I could write even more than 1,000 words, and kept that up consistently. And then suddenly I had this book. But I also approached it in a way that I was telling myself, no one's going to read this book. And I tried not to think about the editors or about the readers. And that was the only way I think you can let go of trying to write, think too much about your writing and how you're coming across, so that your writing is authentic, but also getting away from that imposter syndrome when you're like, gosh, my writing's never going to be good enough. And it's a strange process. By the time I finished the book, I went back and did another draft, and I was nearing my deadline, and I thought, what, it's not good, but it's fine, and at least you can say you've written a book, and it's really hard to know whether your book is good or not, because you've obviously gone through the process, and you can't be objective with it. So I've just been over the moon with like the feedback, and that people actually enjoyed reading it.
Yeah, it really is. It's a really enjoyable read, and you should be very proud of it. And your writing is really brilliant. So having done that, what was the publishing process like for you? How did you get to the publisher that you've got, and what was that process like?
Yeah, so it took a few attempts. So I searched for a literary agent initially, and had a string of rejections. I'd put my proposal together, and then sent it out to literary agents. And then after that string of rejections, I kind of left it for a while. And then it was actually when the pandemic hit that I thought, I need something positive to focus on, and it seemed like a good opportunity to pick it back up again. So I went back online and I looked for similar books to the one that I wanted to write, and then tried to find their literary agents, and that was much more successful. So I found a literary agent, and then worked with her on the proposal, and then shortly after signed with Brat. who were quite excited about the book and about my story, and also Brat's an interesting publisher as well, with also a female adventurer who founded the publishers, so it was a really nice fit. And so I found the process, you know, then from writing the book, in a weird way I found the actual writing to be the easiest part, because I could just sit down and be in my own head. But then the editing gets really tedious because you just have to keep reading your own writing, and then, you know, the marketing has been a lot more hard work than I was expecting. All the interviews and talks and things, it's all been very exciting, and so it's long and slow, but it's just been incredible. I still have to pinch myself that it happened, really.
And if out in the audience we've got people who are would-be writers, what would your top 3 writing tips be for them? For me, I found blogging to be such an amazing step to writing. Firstly, because it really helps you find your voice, and I think what's great about a blog is there's no rules, so you can really just you know, you can write however you want to, and your blogs can be crafted however you want, and I think that freedom is amazing to have as a writer. But it also really helps you when you come to being published, because then you have a public profile, and that will really help you. The publishers like to see that, so definitely get into blogging if you can. I'd say my trick of sitting down and doing 1,000 words before you do anything else in your day, it takes a bit of discipline, and that's a really nice morning routine to get into, to make sure you're actually chipping away at it. And finally, I would work on yourself and your confidence, because I think there are so many great writers out there and so many people that want to write and publish a book, and they just think they're not good enough, which is nonsense. And so try and get out your comfort zone a bit. I mean, I'm a big advocate now for going on adventures, because that's how I got my confidence back, and that's how I've been able to, yeah, kind of take the confidence I learned from going on adventures and put that in other areas in my life, like writing a book. So yeah, start putting yourself out of your comfort zone. Yeah, you're talking about confidence and you know, self-esteem, and I've always thought of you as a very confident, articulate young woman, and I found it really quite emotional reading how much you've struggled through life with feelings of low self-esteem and not feeling worthy and feeling like a failure because you didn't fit the expected norms. And I think there are a lot of women, you know, myself included, who have felt and still do feel that fraudulent feel. How did the hike change this, and why do you think it did?
The hike changed me massively, and if I can really look at the hike as the me before the hike and me after the hike, and before the hike I was just very lost. I really didn't know who I was as a person, and I really, that came down to, I was trying to live a life that didn't fit me. I really struggle with like the 9 to 5 routine, and commutes and the rat race, and this kind of materialistic world that we're kind of all thrown into as soon as we leave school, and it's not me, and I never really had an opportunity just to discover who I was without all the baggage that we have in everyday life. And when I was on that hike, I was really back to basics. I didn't have like a boss breathing down my neck. I didn't have to be anywhere at a particular time. I didn't have to worry about what I was wearing that day, and that was just really freeing, and it just gave me space to kind of just be, and to really start learning who I was as an individual. And the thing that I love most about adventures and why they're so great at building confidence is, I mentioned before, the self-doubt that we all have in our heads, that we tell ourselves what we're capable of and what we're not capable of. And I would be in the desert and I would look up at a big mountain. There would be these huge wadis that we'd have to climb out of, and I would look up and my head would start going, you're exhausted, it's too hot, there is no way you're going to get to the top of that, you physically are not capable of doing it. But the reality is, when you're on an adventure, on a hike like that, you have no choice. You have to get to the top, because at the top was where our water source was, and where we would camp for the night. So we had to do it. And so I would just have to ignore those voices and just focus on putting one foot in front of the other, and I would always make it. So I learned in time on the adventure that the voices you hear in your head are best ignored, because they're not true, and they don't know what they're talking about, and you're capable of achieving so much more than you think you are. And it really just comes down to focusing on that next step, the 1 foot in front of you, 1 foot in front of the other, until you reach your goal. And so all that learning I was able to take with me, and kind of take that into my life after the hike.
Well, I mean, I think the message that comes through from the book, and you actually state it in the book, but it does permeate all the way through, is that if I can do this, you can too. And if you put your mind to it, anything's possible. Is that one of the underpinning principles that you've taken through in the development of Love Her Wild? And linked with that, how do we make sure that adults, like teachers, like parents, appreciate the impact, positive and negative, impacts that their words can have on a child and a young person's self-esteem?
Yeah, it makes me very sad to think of all the throwaway comments that a teacher can make that will really stay with a child. And so it's so important to think about the way we are speaking to our young people, and also the way we're speaking to ourselves and the stories we tell ourselves, because really that filters down. But yeah, it's definitely a message that I like to give people. I also like to have a reality check in that, like I consider myself very privileged in that I was born in the UK and I'm able-bodied and I had an education which most people in the world don't have. So we do have restraints in our lives, and perhaps not everything is possible, but for most people there are huge opportunities available to them, and they're simply not taking them because they're stopping themselves. And I think the way I see it is, I've been very privileged and lucky to be born in the UK and to have all these opportunities in my life. So the best thing I can do with that privilege is to take them and make the most of my life, and then to use that to kind of give back to others less fortunate. So that's definitely a message that I like to spread with Love Her Wild, and to try and empower women to really start thinking outside the box and to start thinking bigger.
Yeah, and that, I agree with you, that is so important. Can I perhaps then ask you at this point if maybe you could just give us another reading taste from the book?
Sure. So now skipping right to the desert, and I've spent a couple of weeks in the desert, and the hike from the halfway point suddenly changed, and we were in the Negev, and we would be days without seeing people, and the hiking got much tougher. And we had to be really careful about our water and food supply. So the whole feel of the hike changed in the desert. As I walked, a montage of random memories would play out in my head. Sometimes these were significant moments from my life. My teacher telling me it was my fault I was getting teased because I cut my hair short and wasn't acting like a normal girl. Opening my GCSE results to surprisingly good grades, my parents separating, the last conversation with a friend before she took her own life, those few words forever played on repeat like a broken record, laying eyes on Gil as he walked into Spanish conversation club, catching my granddad Stanley looking at me in a way I couldn't make sense of until I heard he had passed a few days later, stopping by the tree in a New Forest and Gil producing a ring from his pocket. Sometimes, though the memories were so random, it amazed me that my mind had made the effort to store them, like the excitement of finding a 4-leaf clover in my junior school playground, but having no one around to show, or my granddad Fred teaching me to draw a house in 3 dimensions, and me noticing the colouring on his fingernails from decades of smoking. Often I'd return to the same point in time, a few years before doing the hike, when I had been my most unhappy, consumed with a cloud of hopelessness and depression, brought on by the struggles of moving to an isolated city with Gil, bad jobs and financial strain. I had thought that being spat into the world of adulthood, no longer with a home and a bed that I would call my own, was as lost as I would ever feel, but I was wrong. Nothing had been more disorientating and shattering than losing my way internally as I battled with poor mental health. In the desert, though, I could feel old wounds being healed. For a short time, I stopped worrying about finding my way in life or questioning my every move. The path ahead, clearly marked by 3 stripes, the only direction I needed for 2 months. It was a relief that calmed the turbulence as my compass gradually recentered, each way marker pointing south, another step in the right direction.
Yeah, that's a really strong passage, and I think there's an honesty that runs through the whole of the book. You know, you're very honest about some of the issues that you have handled and had to deal with in your life, and I think that's a really important message for young people, which is why I think the book would be really good to be used in schools for upper Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4.
Thank you. It was also quite a healing process, actually, like writing so honestly, and I found it quite cathartic and quite an amazing process, just writing without barriers and just laying yourself bare for the world to read.
Yeah. Does that kind of help in the process of letting some of those feelings go?
Oh, absolutely. I really find writing is the best way for me to process things that have happened in the past and to kind of let them go. And like putting it down in a book and then sharing it publicly was really daunting and really quite a nerve-wracking thing to do. And I remember writing the book, and then the editing process happened, and then it's quite a long time until the book actually comes out. And then like a few days before the release, just being like, oh my God, I don't think I actually want people to read this. So yeah, it was scary, but actually, yeah, it felt good, and it felt it's nice to be authentic, and that's, I think, how you build real connections with other people.
Yeah, I think that's another reason why young people will enjoy it, because they are often not used to adults being honest with about things, and I think that will strike a real chord with a lot of young people. So you've done you've hiked the trail. So how did that then lead you into developing and setting up Love Her Wild? And can you tell us a little bit about what Love Her Wild is, what it does, how it works?
Yeah, so Love Her Wild is a women's adventure community, and we provide opportunities and support and inspiration to try and encourage as many women as possible to get outdoors and go on adventures in any shape and form. Really, there's no judgment on, you know, how big the adventure is. And the idea for Love Her Wild came about because at the end of the hike, I realized I hadn't met a single woman doing the trail. I'd only met guys, and it had been a similar experience before leaving for Israel. So I'd signed up to a few courses in the UK, like outdoor first aid and navigation, to make sure that I knew how to fend for myself. And almost entirely would be the only woman, and often found I was treated differently because of that, and was massively put off by the very macho, very competitive kind of feeling you would often get in the outdoors. And when I reached the end of the hike, it just seemed like a real shame to me that I hadn't met more women who were on adventures, because I'd taken so much from it myself. And I think women especially, we have so many constraints in our day-to-day lives, and you know, we're responsible for so many people and juggling so many plates. It's so important that we give ourselves that time to be in wild spaces and to be free of all that. So I launched Love Her Wild, and it started out as a modest sized Facebook group, and has just absolutely snowballed since then. And it's now a registered social enterprise that's been recognized for all sorts of awards. And I have a wonderful team of women helping to run expeditions and organize free local meetups across the UK. So yeah, it's been quite an incredible journey, and obviously it's been great to find my passion in life, and to kind of step up and find a job that I love doing so much.
Well, I know that we've got at least one woman in our audience who has experienced a Love Her Wild adventure. Elizabeth Bentley, would you come on screen and just talk about what you did as part of your Love Her Wild adventure, and why you did it, and what the impact it had on you?
Yeah, I think we were, our expedition, if you can call it that, was probably the second big one that Bex organised. She'd done something in the Lake District with a bunch of women, and she wanted to do something rather different for women who, like me, aren't particularly adventurous, and don't have a lot of confidence, and maybe just don't see themselves as adventurers. At the time, I think I was 66 or 67 when 66 when I applied, 67 when we did it. So age was certainly a factor for me. I'd been brought up on things like Swallows and Amazons and all those sort of books, but I'd never actually ever done any of those things. So when Bex offered this opportunity to have a time in the woods, now I've always loved the woods, so that was a real attraction for me. Apparently she had about 100 people apply, so I'm incredibly lucky that I was one of the few chosen. Not by Bex, but by her fellow organizer, Emma, who has Parkinson's disease. So that's, that was one of the things that everybody pretty much everybody of those who were chosen had some kind of life issue, I should say. I was looking after my very aged mother at the time, so that was perhaps another issue. But we spent 5 days. Bex decided to make it really hard for us, so we could only eat what the Syrian refugee camp people get as a package of food, which is less the fish, because Bex is vegetarian, so we weren't allowed to eat fish. We, as you can see, we had to boil our own water. You can see behind me, a few of us. We had to boil all the water which we got from the local stream. Apparently it was relatively safe, but we boiled it just in case. Which had fun times when we also had to cook in that dish, so we had to throw away a whole lot of water we carefully boiled because it was oily from stuff we'd been frying. So there were quite a lot of issues. We didn't have tents. We were using bivvy bags, just on the ground, no mats. Actually, I'm not sure mats are a brilliant idea. I think I preferred not having a mat, having tried it since. So we just had this amazing time. And one of the things I wanted to say was that I think if we'd been a mixed group, more of us would have hung back when it came to lighting fires, which took hours. We would, someone else, we'd have sent the men off, the men would have gone off and got the wood. The men would have gone off and got the water. As it was, we just stepped up and did it. I think the other thing that happened was that Bex, I think, had imagined that we'd each take turns at being the leader of the group, and it just never happened. No one ever felt that they had to be a leader or that we needed a leader. We just cooperated. I think cooperation is something that women are often quite good at, and it really came through on that time.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. That I as I say, we know each other quite well, and I was very impressed that you went off and did that, and thank you for sharing that with us today. I don't know if there's anyone else out in our audience who has been part of the Love Her Wild Adventures, who might want to say what they did and the impact. If you do, just pop your name in the chat box and we can do it. If everybody's shy, then we'll just move on, and I will ask Bex another question.
There you go, Kylie.
Kylie, yeah, Kylie, would you like to unmute and take your camera off and just tell us your experience?
Sure. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
I've been I don't know how long I've been part of Love Her Wild for. I suppose with the pandemic, you can add a couple of years that I've forgotten all about, but we certainly have quite a thriving community for Love Her Wild in Berkshire and Hampshire, where I live. And we do some fantastic walks around and hikes around the New Forest. And we've been on some really good overnight adventures where we learn to do navigation and pick ourselves up the butt and just keep walking and just keep trying and meeting new friends. And I've had some really lovely conversations with people. I really liked what you said before, Bex, about I'm very much one for being my authentic self. And I do believe that that is how we make true connection, with that open heart, strong spine and open heart, I call it.
Yeah.
Just keep putting one foot in front of the other. And I found Love Her Wild to be a really open-hearted and inclusive place. Haven't done as much as I would have liked in the last year. I've been very busy with my head in work and university, unfortunately, but I'm really looking forward to next year and being able to join some more adventures. So I would thoroughly recommend it to anybody who wants to give it a go. You will be very welcomed, and those arms will be very wide as they receive you.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that, Kylie. Appreciate it, because it just brings that perspective behind the book and behind Bex, and you know, the amazing things that you've achieved and what you've been able to facilitate other women achieving. So, and I know that you yourself have been off on other adventures over, and mini adventures over this, you know, these last few years. I was particularly fascinated by the paddle pickup, because I do remember your mum telling me about it when you went off. So do you want to tell us a little bit about some of the other adventures that you've had?
Sure. I mean, they're quite addictive adventures. I really did catch the adventure bug. So the paddle pickup one was one of the bigger ones I'd done, and I'd never kayaked before that. And I went from not kayaking to kayaking the width of the UK, which really goes to show that a lot of sports like that really you can grasp very quickly. And that was a lot of fun. I did fall in once, which wasn't so fun. And the other really big adventure I've done is kick scooting the length of America. So again with Gil, we kick scooted from Canada to Mexico. It took 3 months. And when I say kick scoot, I mean like the scooters that you see the kids kick scooting on, but just an adult version. We didn't know if it was possible. I can tell you it is possible. You do have to push them uphill though. And then lots of adventures, and actually some of them, my most favorite adventures really are the ones with Love Her Wild. I really like those team adventures when you're with a group of women that you'd never meet in like normal circumstances, and you come together and you have loads of banter and you sit around the fire in the evening and you talk in a way that you never talk with people in your real life. And so I've made so many wonderful friends like that. And even in like the COVID times and since having a baby, I've been trying to keep the adventures going. So actually was it this year I took my little one when she was probably about 11 months old, and went to Dartmoor, and we wild camped for 3 days. I had like an off-road buggy, put the baby and all the camping gear on the buggy, and just went and explored Dartmoor, which was wonderful. I definitely needed adapting the adventures compared to what I'm normally used to. We probably covered like, I don't know, 2 miles a day versus 20 miles a day as I'd normally do without the baby, but it didn't matter. And it's just about, you know, again, being out your comfort zone and just being in those wild spaces.
So it leads me neatly into my next question really is, what next in terms of both adventuring and book writing?
So I'm trying to work all this out now. I like this time of year when it comes to the end of the year and I reflect and I'm like, right, what's next year? And it's hard. I don't know if other people are struggling with this with COVID, but it all still feels very much out of our control. And normally I'm a real planner and I like to set goals, and it feels like, gosh, you can get excited about something and it can be taken away from you quite quickly. So I'm trying to be quite fluid with my adventure goals, but I would really like to fit in a multi-day hike next year. Again, probably taking Rivi, my daughter, along and doing something a little bit longer. And if we can't get overseas, then we'll make that happen in the UK, definitely. And I would like to do another adventure for myself. And again, I'm just trying to think of something creative that I can do closer to home, so that we're not reliant on being overseas, because there are so many great spots in the UK and great adventures to be had here. for book writing. I'm hoping my next book, it's a bit of a secret, but I'm not very good with secrets, so I'll tell you anyway.
Well, we'll hold everybody else
Okay.
to account for the secret.
Yeah.
You've got to keep the secret.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm hoping my next one will actually be more about my story of launching Love Her Wild, and I'd like to write a book in to help other people who want to grow online communities that have a mission, that are mission driven. And so it will be part my story, part a guidebook, and part case studies of other individuals that have grown an online community. So I'm hoping that will be my next book, although I definitely have more adventure inspired stories in me.
Well, you can perhaps, yes, you can slip some of those in whatever you write next and build outwards from it. So we've still got a little bit of time. So does anyone else have a question that they'd like to ask Bex? If you do, just pop it in the chat box or speak out.
It'd be easier than typing it. Yeah, question for Bex. When you think about people doing all these hikes and things and wild camping, you imagine they find a wonderful beauty spot to camp in each evening. And I know from reading your book this wasn't the case with you doing the Israeli National Trail. And that's I found that so funny. It's time after time after time you had your wonderful camping spot disrupted by all sorts of things. So I just wondered well, first of all, have you thought about rewriting that book that you decided wasn't really much of a guide, because you could probably write a better guidebook now for the Israeli National Trail? But also, have the Israeli National Trail Tourist Board got back to you about your experiences in light of what happened on your journey, basically?
I probably won't write a guide, but I've written lots of blogs actually, and they get visited a fair amount by people that want to hike the Israel National Trail, because I'm one of the few people that have written a guide in English, and I quite like that I can keep that updated, and I get all sorts of interesting people contacting me via that. In fact, I had a really interesting case a couple of years ago where a lady in America contacted me and said her husband had printed out my blogs about the Israel National Trail and had gone to Israel, and she hadn't heard from him for a week, and I was feeling like really responsible that I may have got her husband lost in the desert, but thankfully we managed to help her track him down. He was fine. He'd just gone AWOL in Jerusalem. And do you know, I haven't actually contacted the any kind of Israel tourism board, but I probably should. I don't, like there's these horrible campsites on the trail. There's no other way of kind of glossing around this. And they've put these campsites next to like quarries in the desert. And you think, gosh, I've been hiking in the desert for like miles and miles, like uninterrupted, so beautiful. And you choose to put the hikers next to the blooming working quarries. It's pretty horrible. So I do hope that maybe that will you know, someone somewhere will read that and start thinking maybe we'll set up nicer camp spots for the hikers going through.
Anyone else have a, sorry,
I definitely think you should.
Yeah. Anyone else have another question or a comment? No, I think
there's a message here that's come to me from Susie, who has asked, are all your adventures land-based? She says, sorry, I was late joining, so you may have covered this.
No. I think land-based. So I've done 2 water-based ones. One was the paddle pickup, the kayak in the width of the UK, and I also spontaneously joined a sailing expedition that was leaving from Gothenburg in Sweden to Portsmouth, which was, I think it was about 10 days in length. And it was like a real last minute decision to do this. And this sailing company, they're called Tall Ships Youth Trust, basically had a sale on because they had spaces on this trip and they couldn't shift them. So they offered spaces really cheap. And it was an amazing experience, but man, I got really seasick. The first like 48 hours was pretty grim. But once I got got my sea legs, it was much better, and it was just amazing. I mean, the North Sea is very choppy, but yeah, the stars at night and steering this 72-foot yacht was incredible. Seeing the oil rigs is just really mind-blowing, seeing them out in the middle of nowhere. Oh, and Elizabeth just reminded me of whale shark expedition. So this is a Love Her Wild trip that I organise, which is all around conserving whale sharks. They're an endangered species. So in Tanzania, we get teams to go to this island called Mafia, and we swim with whale sharks, and we collect conservation data to aid the protection of these animals. So yeah, those are my water-based ones, no flying ones.
Barbara says Tonga and humpback whales.
Yeah, that was more a holiday. That was that was the last like splashing out holiday and before having a baby. And I'm glad I did, because then lockdown happened. So
yeah, it's kind of everyone's plans, didn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Anything else from anyone? Yeah, I'll give you a minute. No.
Thank you to Elizabeth and Kylie for your kind words about Love Her Wild. It's always, it just amazes me hearing other people who've managed to, get positive things from the community. Yeah, can't quite believe it's real, and there's all these women doing cool stuff.
Well, before I sort of bring the event to a close and thank Bex, just a few things to say. Just a reminder that you can order a signed book plated copy of 3 Stripes South. Naomi's put the order link into the chat box again, and yeah, it's £9.99 including postage and packing for 1 copy, or £8 if you order more than 6. For those teachers and librarians out there, we have a future virtual event. Our next one is on January the 27th at 10 o'clock in the morning, when we're doing a schools event on Holocaust Memorial Day with Liz Kessler for When the World Was Ours. Email events@authorsallouduk.co.uk if you're interested in receiving details. If you don't want us to keep your details on file so that we can let you know about our future events, please email me and I will remove you from the list. So just to say a few thanks. Thanks to Naomi for being in the background and keeping an eye on Zoom and making sure it behaves itself as well as it can. Thanks to Elizabeth and Kylie, because it was lovely to get that personal experience of what you've been doing and why and how. Thank you to all of you for coming tonight and for supporting us by booking authors through us and coming to our events. And finally, a huge special thanks to you, Bex, for such a great evening and your amazing achievements and this amazing book. So don't ever let anybody try and steal your confidence again, because you are a remarkable young woman. So if you've got mugs of tea or glasses of anything, just raise them and cheers to you, Bex, and cheers to a future that is going to be bright and happy. So
thank you so
congratulations.
Much. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and thank you really to you and Naomi. It's brilliant what you guys do. Feel really honoured to be part of this event tonight.
It's been our pleasure, and
all your wonderful words. Really, I'm bursting.
It's been our pleasure. It really has, and
thank you.
I can't advocate for the book strongly enough. I just loved it. So I do hope everybody's enjoyed tonight. Hope to see you again in the future. And I hope you all have a very happy Christmas when it comes. So, yeah, thank you and bye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful Christmas. Thank you.